If you haven't checked out the first part of this video, please use the link on screen now or in the description. It covers the first 3 levels I attempted to speedrun as X-Sonic, Black Core, Island, Cross and Run, but it isn't necessary to understand what will happen in this installment. In fact, I've changed a few things. For a start, I'm not going to even pretend that I'm turning around a section of video from recording to completely edited section of timeline in a day. That was beyond fanciful of me, and after I claimed I could do such in the last part script, I ended up taking a fortnight to make the video. The second change is about how I'm conducting the runs. I originally was aiming more for a target time, and then stopping as soon as I got that time. I'll still be setting myself a target, but I'll also set aside an hour per level. If I hit the target in the first 10 minutes, great. We'll just keep going and see how quick of a time I can get after those 60 minutes. This time, as recommended by you, the audience, I'll be speedrunning Follow Your Rainbow from Angel Island Tour, Greenflower Mountain from SRB2 Generations, and Speed Highway from the mod of the same name. But let's get into it. I started with Follow Your Rainbow, as I already had some experience with the level, albeit a fair while ago, but it's something of a start in comparison to the other two. A third Roger van der Weyde level, this one is thankfully far less annoying than Run. As a pseudo remake of City Escape from Sonic Adventure 2, it contains far fewer corridors, fewer sharp corners, and best of all, no real auto run. I actually booted it up as X-Sonic while bored before starting on the process of making this video, which meant I accidentally set myself an initial time of 1:29.71. Oops. But more importantly, began to get an idea of some of the things I need to take into account, avoid, or do to get my time as low as possible. Some sections have been cut out or minimised, places to collect rings and speed sneakers were located, and an idea of how many rings I'd need to ration to ensure I could successfully use a ring burst when needed was calculated. In the end, based off these factors, a recognition of how my 1:29.71 wasn't a fantastic run, and considering the times of other, better speedrunners on the same level, my target for Follow Your Rainbow was 50 seconds. The course here can be split into 4 distinct areas: the opening streets, the central town, the gun convoy, and the final mall. There are different things that needed to be considered for each section to cut off as many seconds as possible, so we need to begin any good run with a strong opener. As the opening streets are basically just a set of straight lines and right angles, mercifully much more devoid of stuff compared to Run, which on paper was basically the same thing, there isn't much to do to save off time outside of playing well and not aiming in the wrong direction when performing a zip dash. The only points of note is avoiding this gun hunter in the middle of the road, which takes 2 hits to destroy and will therefore harmlessly knock you back to slightly delay you, and then performing a zip dash jump correctly at the end to cut out a winding section of road that enters the central town. Entering it from this angle gives you 3 different paths forward: the bottom path, or a higher path on either side. Taking the left path will lead to an elevated section of road, which you should also reach by zip dash jumping from the bottom path, but going right goes down a different path. All 3 converge at the same point, but because the right path gives you the straightest shot to that point, I think it's the faster of the 3 to go down. From there you get a completely pointless 2D section, then you are deposited in the gun convoy. As a standard character you would need to hop between vehicles to reach the front, but because X-Sonic is so ridiculously quick, you can just zip dash along the edges of the road instead, which would normally be dragging you back. Sticking to the edges ensures you don't need to weave around the vehicles. It's also pretty clear where zip dash jumps are needed, in that they're reserved for these massive walls, but otherwise you just need to look at popping a few capsules. Rings are good, especially if you find yourself running low, but the only one that is really necessary for the best time are the speed sneakers near the end. You then want to enter the final area, them all with about 25 to 30 rings, as this ensures your ring burst can last long enough to, once you reach this central section, fly over this wall into this ledge, whereupon you just need to pass a few more corridors and land in the right part of the parking lot outside to complete the level. I got my time to drop fairly quickly once I started recording. Within the first 30 minutes I dropped my time from 1:29.71 to 1:20.42, then to 1:05.80, then to 1:04.60, then to 1:00.57, then finally to 0:51.94. I was originally going to set my target for 1 minute, which I would have smashed by this point, and I was just barely missing out on my actual target during runs I could see areas of real potential improvement in. I'd figured out how to ensure relatively consistent and fast runs, such as not using the camera in the opening street when aiming the zip dash due to a lack of obstacles you need to avoid. That cuts out needing to account for changes in camera angle, and finding an earlier speed sneakers monitor on the right path of the central town, as well as keeping as far left as possible in the final corridor of the level to walk through the final gun trucks' hitboxes. But by this point, all of the annoyances of playing as Exonic had cropped up. A barely controllable zip dash and an inconsistent ring burst chief among them, and the pain points of Follow Your Rainbow had been made crystal clear. Straight away, something about the opening makes a minor glitch I keep experiencing in SRB2 much more common, where your character just won't recognise movement input straight away when the level starts. It is just a case of resetting the level and trying again, but it was annoyingly common for me to abort a run before it had even really started, because this would have added a few seconds to my final time. You need to be fairly precise when using the zip dash jump at the end of the opening streets to get into the central town, because you need the angle of the stairs to get the necessary height over this wall, but the edges of the stairs and gun beetles on it will quite often cause you to lose speed and not have the power needed. The run then just needs to be aborted. Getting up to the right path can be difficult at speed, just something to do with the shape of the ramp. And then there was a fairly common thing if I collected the first set of speed sneakers, where Exonic would end up weirdly magnetised to the left wall during the gun convoy and end up bouncing off it constantly. It didn't happen all the time, and I think it was actually due to my camera, which would begin rotating for no reason, and I could fight it, but it only happened if I was using speed sneakers. Maybe it's something to do with the unique properties of the moving roads? I don't know. And then the more was fine outside the usual ring burst unpredictability. All in all, these problems piled up by the end of my time, and it took me twice as long to drop from 0:51.94 to 0:50.60 as it did for me to drop from 1:29.71 to 0:51.94. By the end of my time with the level, I had carefully timetabled where I needed to be by certain times or else I had no chance of improving. I needed to have reached the central town in 12 to 13 seconds, I needed to be at the convoy by 25 to 27 seconds, and I needed to reach the mall between 25 to 30 seconds, or else even if I had good luck with the ring burst, there was no chance I could get below 50 seconds. Initially, I had actually failed to reach my target even with this strict time frame to weed out hopeless runs. 0:50.60 was just the best run I could achieve after an hour had elapsed. But I refused to accept that I would fail just 0.6 of a second off of that target, and after marking up my initial footage, I spent a final 20 minutes losing those final deciseconds. That's the word for 1/10 of a second, look it up. Yes, it took me 20 minutes to lose 60 centiseconds, 1/100th of a second, and indeed I posted a time of 0:50.34 in the process. That was almost a particularly annoying final twist of the knife. But with the new Chaos Island R.B.U remix for Sonic X Generations playing in the background, I finally passed my target. 0:46.62. Here's the run. The next stage was Modern Greenflower Mountain from SRB2 Generations, a mod I had never heard of prior to running a vote on which levels I should speedrun, but which turned out to be really good. It's a level pack designed to be played as modern Sonic, and only contains 2 levels so far, but both are unique and are a fun time to traverse, even at the ridiculously high speeds of the Zip Dash. After all, I imagine the thought process for designing a stage for modern Sonic would be much the same as designing one for X-Sonic. Both are characters you can run ridiculously quickly, can't turn very well, and have powerful abilities that require a constant stream of rings to use. It was just a pleasant time in a way that the other stages I've ran so far just hadn't been. It felt like a level where I finally wasn't fighting against X-Sonic to get my times. I could just concentrate on plotting a course, then executing it as well as possible, rather than need to fight X-Sonic every step of the way just to ensure that he travels in a straight line. With that being said, after a few runs through the level to familiarise myself with the course, I set myself an initial time of 52 seconds. That felt like a good run in a way previous initial times just weren't, so I set myself a relatively conservative 40 seconds as a target time. In the end, I passed that time very quickly, although I ultimately didn't spend the full hour pulling it down much further. You see, SRB2 Generations has no record attack mode, and as such I just had to judge whether or not a run was faster than the previous one based off the ultimately relatively vague round to the nearest second timer that's used when playing a level from a slave slot. Additionally, because there's no green text appearing at the top of the screen when you've beaten your previous best time, I had a harder time marking down the best times, and I didn't have the luxury of a retry button to quickly restart a level from the beginning. So, all in all, smoklyre needs to add a record stack mode, seeing as I spent a third of my time here trying in vain to reinstate one. But I can still give tips on how to get a good run here, so it's not a complete loss. Firstly, you want to remain grounded for as long as possible for 2 reasons. Firstly, you can keep zip dashing, which is the fastest X-Sonic can ever travel, and secondly, this ensures you're collecting as many rings as possible. This is vital because it turns out, you don't need to think about the second half of the level at all. Ring burst from this point, and as long as you've collected a decent number of the rings lying around up to that point, you will have more than enough to fly to the end. Just make sure you aim well at that point, because this is a situation where you need to hit the signpost rather than just pass some sort of invisible gate. And there are a fair number of invisible walls between starting the ring burst and the level ending. So, you just need to zip dash jump here, let X-Sonic automatically vault over obstacles up to this point, zip dash jump again, zip dash jump over the water, then make sure you hit all the boosters between this point and the start of the ring burst, and then just fly to the end. In the end, I finished with a time of 38 seconds, although considering 3 of those are spent waiting for this opening screen to disappear, it's probably more accurate to say I finished with a time of 35 seconds. I think that's fairly good. Here's the run. Speed Highway was the final hurdle in the speedrunning trial by fire, and in many ways it was the most challenging of the lot. Firstly, it is far and away the most open level of the 6, with a ton of alternate paths and open spaces that I needed to navigate to find little openings into the next area, which made routing much more important than previous levels. The ring burst is also utilised much more often than before. Rather than one long usage somewhere towards the end of a level, I'd have to use it in smaller bursts to quickly cross gaps or reach higher areas. And as much as most of the level is characterised like this, open areas with dangerous crevices between them, precision and quick reflexes are still needed in the final 2 sections to weave between pillars and dart through narrow city streets. To avoid a follow your rainbow situation, I first tested the course in a normal save slot, which allowed me to get my bearings, understand how the level was partitioned, and get myself an initial time of 1:52. That was really just a standard fast-ish run through the level though, the sort of thing you'd expect after a person plays a level they completed a few times before. And comparing that with times from different speedruns, I decided that a realistic time to target was about 1:20. The first area in Speed Highway is running across the rooftops of the various skyscrapers, in what is probably the most confusing part of the level design. All of the platforms and routes are stacked on top of each other and repeat similar textures, which makes figuring out the right path, even once you know your route, a bit of a nightmare. After reaching this road, probably via a ring burst, we enter an indoor section, although this is a really simple bit. Zip dash through most of it, which is easy to do due to a lack of serious obstacles. Then another ring burst can be used to quickly gain the height to avoid needing to climb the stairs to this balcony. That opens back up to the rooftops, and while it looks just as knotted and multifaceted as before, it's actually the easiest part of the whole run. Go around or above the building immediately to your right when you first enter, and drop straight into the entrance to the penultimate section, the tower descent. The helicopters are damaging, but they're easy to avoid even at high speeds when you can simply vault over whatever these are supposed to be. And then dodging the pillars is where reflexes are actually needed, although it's by no means impossible to do it damageless without practice, and we can leave and run out into the city streets. Once your route is planned out, this becomes the hardest part of the level. The difficulty with the first 3 sections is figuring out the quickest way to reach the next part, and taking damage doesn't slow you down too much in the tower descent, but you can lose a lot of time going too slowly through these streets. Try and save some rings for the end though, because the quickest way to reach the capsule is to just ring burst up to it, cutting out any need to wall run or use the intended path. And that's your plan of attack. Unfortunately though, in the end, even with all of that, I got nowhere near my target time of 1:20. Once again, Speed Highway is another mod that disables record attack, which makes the whole thing an unenjoyable chore to speedrun, and not something I really wanted to bother with. I tried to get decent runs for a good half hour, before I got annoyed, tried to modify the Speed Highway file to enable record attack, and ended up breaking it to the point it would crash my game upon loading. So, for future reference, if I make a poll and you're going to recommend me a mod that's good for speedrunning, make sure I can actually access the speedrunning mode of the game while I'm playing on it. As it is, there were a few things that stopped me from improving my final time much beyond the fact that I was just a bit annoyed. Firstly, I couldn't figure out a route to improve my opening much, which already left me at a disadvantage when it came to lowering my overall time. Then, while I did figure out how to complete the indoor section without needing to use a ring burst, which was actually probably faster in the end, I found that using the zip dash stopped me from collecting most of the rings in the level. Probably something to do with lower hitboxes or something, and while it meant little at this stage, it became a major concern later on. The second outdoor section just comes down to stopping your zip dash as you transition from the prior section, which should stop you sliding down the steep incline as much as to zip dash, jump or ring burst around the building sooner. Then I just did not have the reaction speed to avoid the pillars in the tower descent. And then when I can barely confirm that X Sonic will travel in the direction I'm aiming my zip dash in at any point, the chances of getting through these streets without a lot of that becomes naught. I could see plenty of areas of potential improvement, but I could never fulfill it. And by the end, I'd only dropped my time by about 12 seconds, to a 1:40. Here's the run, just don't expect it to be any good. That was a bit of a flop of an ending, wasn't it? Get to the final level, and then completely fail to make any real progress towards my target time. I'd like for this to be the time I could say, and now here's a final speedrun to make up for it. But I don't have the time to add the extra time for scripting and editing that would come with that to the video, so there isn't one. But to try and paint a brighter picture, let me put out some stats. Of the 6 stages that I attempted to speedrun as X-Sonic, I managed to surpass the target I set for myself on 4 of them: Black Core, Island Cross, Follow Your Rainbow, and Modern Greenflower Mountain. I didn't set a target for run, but I had a pretty monumental time saving from my original time, so I think that should sort of count too. Of those, the longest I spent on one stage was 1 hour and 20 minutes on Follow Your Rainbow, while I spent just 10 minutes replaying Modern Greenflower Mountain before beating my target. Has this series changed how I view speedrunning? Sort of. I've learned how much of a rush there is to saving off fractions of a second from a time, but it's also made me realise that I could never do a full game speedrun. That's just too long of a time for something to go wrong and require starting all over again. Has it changed how I view X-Sonic? Yes. I like him even less. Before, I could believe that my inability to place him was to do with being bad at him, and that's what it might look like based off just my footage. But I cannot stress this enough. That footage is based off the fact that half of the time he just will not accurately follow my movement inputs. I can aim a zip dash in one direction just for it to go in a completely different direction, or I can stop inputting inputs and still have him weave around slightly. He's unpredictable, and the best I feel I can do is point him in a vague direction and hope for the best. Accurate to the character, sure, but miserable as a player character in a platformer. If I could turn down his zip dash sensitivity significantly and feel like he'd listen to my commands, I could maybe enjoy X-Sonic, but as I couldn't, these speedruns were miserable. Let's maybe do this format again in the future, but I make sure I stipulate that any voted maps would allow me to actually use record attack. This sort of thing is why it's there, people. And choose a character that feels a little more reined in, like Neo Sonic or Surge. But I do hope that for all of my complaints throughout, you enjoy this video in both its parts, and would like to see more like it. For now though, I'll finish with a ciao.